Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Advance Your University's Research Mission with Text and Data Mining, which is sponsored by ProQuest. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I would just like to point out a few features of the webinar software. In the main area of the screen, you should be able to follow along with the presentation materials. Along the right-hand side, you should see some labels for both the chat and the Q&A. Please use the chat panel to let me know of any technical issues that you're having. We'll deal with those through that means privately. And then please use the Q&A to present questions to our speakers. We'll take some time at the end to get to as many questions as we have time for. So I would encourage you, if you got a question, drop it in that Q&A box. And like I said, we'll get to as many as we can. All right, also note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who signed up should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archived version. All right, that is enough initial direction out of me. So I will go ahead and turn the floor over to Mindy from ProQuest.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to everybody for joining us this afternoon. We're looking forward to an exciting discussion with our presenters and plenty of time for questions, as Mark mentioned. Just to launch us off into our webinar today, I will just introduce our speakers, and then I will hand it over to each one of them to review their case study and go through the story of how their university is implementing and dealing with text and data mining. So I'm Mindy Posnell. I'm the Director of Product Management at ProQuest for our text and data mining and analytics products. So again, thank you for joining us. And first up, we'll have Caroline Muglia, pardon me, our co-assistant dean at USC. And we have John Cocklin from Dartmouth, who is the Business, Economics, and Engineering Library. And I will do a little further introduction of each one of them before we get into their case studies. So the agenda for today, I will finish up our introduction. We'll start with Caroline for her case study of text and data mining, and then a little bit of implementation of TDM Studio at USC, followed by John, who will also discuss how the library is approaching text and data mining at Dartmouth, and also review some of the planned implementation for TDM Studio. I'll finish up with a few comments about TDM Studio from ProQuest, what our goal is and how we're trying to help researchers in their text and data mining process, and give you a quick glimpse into where we're headed for the rest of this year and moving into 2021. And again, we'll have plenty of time for questions. So please don't be shy and drop those in the Q&A. I'll start with Caroline, who, as I mentioned, is the co-assistant dean for collections and the head of resource sharing and collection development at USC, who is one of the early adopters of TDM Studio from ProQuest. Prior to USC, Caroline worked at the Library of Congress as a data librarian, and she also worked for an educational tech company. She received her MLIS from UNC Chapel Hill, where she focused on digital archives. So her research and teaching interests include user-driven acquisitions, assessment techniques, and the role librarians and product systems play in choices made by users. So there's lots of learning to go on with how to deal with text and data mining. Caroline will read with us also. And then we'll have John Cocklin case study. He's currently the Business, Economics, and Engineering Librarian and the co-lead for their research data program. John has been at Dartmouth for over 20 years and is currently the library's liaison to the economics department and the Tuck School of Business. So over his experience, he's served multiple roles, including the government documents librarian, math librarian, law librarian, and social science data librarian. So talking about text and data mining, it's great that John will bring some experience about all the different disciplines and how it might apply across those. So with that, I want to thank John and Caroline very much for joining us today and giving us some insight into the implementation of text and data mining within each one of their library environments and the differences in how they're approaching it. So we will start with Caroline, but first I will review just some of the outcomes that we hope for you to gain throughout the session, which is really talking about how libraries are collaborating with research teams, how libraries are able to help researchers get more value from the library's existing content using text and data mining. So looking at current subscriptions and how are there different ways to approach and get insights into that content using text and data mining, and facilitating cross-departmental collaboration across different types of faculty, and even across just from the librarians to the faculty themselves. And then also the ability to support and influence research outcomes, and how can we help ensure research success across our organizations. So now, with that said, I will hand it over to Caroline to get us started.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mindy. I want to first thank you so much, all of you, for being here. And I am a real person, but I do have to turn off my video for my portion to ensure that the audio is loud and clear. I figure you'd rather hear what I have to say rather than watching me say it. And then I'll turn it back on for the Q&A. Okay. All right. So thank you so much. My name is Caroline Muglia. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I work at the University of Southern California. Right now I'm in my kitchen. Probably like many of you, you're working remotely, but normally I'm at USC's campus. I want to provide some background before jumping into our case study, background that also applies maybe more generally to the work that John is doing at Dartmouth as well. So USC libraries began collaborating in earnest on text and data mining projects in 2016. And like many colleges and universities, other departments and schools and centers at USC were cultivating these really incredible TDM-focused initiatives, but the libraries was not involved, really at all. Of course, that would begin to change, but as it started, we didn't really have a foot in the game. In the libraries, and also for my background in particular, we didn't have specific expertise in text and data mining, high performance computing, or big data analysis. Our training, and mine specifically, was on-the-job training, or as my favorite Alex book series says, you become an accidental specialist, an accidental expert in text and data mining services and support, and that absolutely rang true for me, and then as it's expanded some of my colleagues as well. I relied heavily on my public-facing colleagues in public and access services for outreach and engagement, and to liaise with constituents on campus to learn about their text and data mining needs, and even projects that were brewing and how the libraries could finally become involved in a meaningful way. In the beginning, we involved very few folks because the requests were relatively simple. But as we've expanded to support additional TDM projects, I rely on colleagues throughout the libraries in IT and acquisitions, the subject liaisons I just referred to, and of course, the researcher. At this point, I am the TDM contact at USC, but the goal, at least for USC, is for more librarians to have some basic TDM literacy to support at least the early stages of TDM research. So since 2016, the volume and type of requests we've received have evolved. So at first, and maybe some of you on the call can relate to this, we heard from computer science and engineering users who needed access to free and large-scale data to test their homegrown platform. So they often didn't care about the content of the data, just that there was enough of it to ensure their platform, which was the real focus of their work, operated well or operated as effectively as they wanted. For those requests, we relied on newspaper data. We also heard from users with research questions that were couched in specific disciplines. So they wanted to utilize TDM Studio and other research tools, but they didn't know how. They knew they couldn't manually sift through their research data to answer their research questions, but they didn't quite know the next step. And I'd say this represented a lot of folks who knocked on our door early on. And then from there, we evolved into working with users that wanted libraries to make connections with other entities on campus doing this work, like the centers and the departments that I referred to earlier. They wanted libraries to purchase specific collections that they could use for their TDM projects. And they began to view the librarians as research partners and the libraries as a place to support the TDM process. And for us, this is really the goal, that meaningful interaction, that research collaboration. So that's the people piece, or the sort of short history of the people piece. The users and the researchers who were sort of beginning to view the libraries as this go-to place for TDM research, and we're thankful for those relationships. But it doesn't account for the vendors, right? Licenses and rights statements are very much in the kind of Wild West stage of standardization. And so is the role of librarians and the expertise among users. So we don't have that industry-wide literacy as we might have with, say, reference interviews or basic cataloging. To support a clearer path forward, at least in my experience, I just listed a few points that may be helpful, and I'd love to hear from you in the Q&A what's working. But vendors really should continue to standardize licenses for TDM of content, which yields positive results for everyone. I hope you hear in my voice an exclamation point, positive results for everyone. And also librarians. Librarians may benefit from designating a colleague or hiring someone new to manage TDM projects in general, but also TDM Studio. My boss likes to say we do too much off the corner of our desks. And we, as in people in the LIS field, and this is certainly one of those initiatives for me and my colleagues. It's not in my statement of responsibilities or my job description. It's just something that was interesting to me, and I saw that there was a need, and so I learned about it. To show really the value of this work, having someone who can focus their attention on all aspects of TDM research and even the future, that forecasting piece, I think would benefit the library, and also research benefit that greatly as well. Okay, so here's our case study that started in 2019, so pretty recently, when I began working with a sociology researcher. She was new to TDM concepts, platforms, and technology, but she knew that to answer her research questions, she needed to move beyond a more manual process that she had used in previous research projects, including her dissertation. So this researcher focused on newspapers. That was what she wanted to focus on from 1960 to 2019. So, a big chunk of time. That alone is a very big data set. And she examined, or is currently examining, patterns of Muslim, Arab, and Middle Eastern activism over this time period. Specifically, her project examined the following questions. How do these groups engage in protest together and separately? How do newspapers represent and conflate these groups over time? What political events shape patterns of activism, and how do these groups form coalitions with other racialized groups in the United States? Recently, when I asked her about her research using TDM Studio, she reminded me that she would have, in a previous life, would have manually downloaded newspaper articles, noting that it would have taken weeks for the scale of her research. I quickly responded and told her it would have taken months and months for the scale of her research, maybe even longer. She also said that TDM Studio helped to quickly create a corpus of articles so that she could analyze patterns, and in this case, terms like Arab, Muslim, Middle Eastern, Latinx, African American, and she could analyze those patterns quickly and systematically, which is really important to her. That time piece is really important to her. For the researcher, TDM Studio was the best option for her research scope, and I think Mindy mentioned in the intro, but we are an early adopter, and this is the first researcher working within TDM Studio on a workbench. So we're learning a lot from this process. We at the libraries already had access to ProQuest newspapers that our researcher identified, so they could be added to the workbench easily. As I mentioned, we're early adopters, so we received initial technical support from ProQuest. I really like TDM Studio because there are entry points for novice researchers like the one I'm talking about today. This researcher was really new to text and data mining, and the TDM Studio platform didn't require her to immediately know more than she did. And those are conversations that I have a lot as the kind of TDM contact. What technical skills do I need to have? How many research assistants do I need to hire? Already sort of aligning themselves to technical skills or equipping themselves with some of that education. And this was, you know, for this novice TDM researcher, even though she's not a novice researcher, it was really helpful. But I'm also working with researchers who have a breadth of technical skills, and the TDM Studio can really scale up for them so they don't feel like the platform isn't delivering enough. So for that reason, it is really helpful for the scope of work that our researchers at USC are looking to get involved in. And then finally, for my purposes, the researchers' engagement with TDM Studio really serves as a diagnostic tool for me to measure capacity and the kind of support we could or should be providing in the libraries for TDM projects. So while she's doing all of her research, I'm kind of on the back end furiously documenting her challenge points or the research questions and how they've evolved, or at what point she is looking for additional technical help, so that we on our end in the libraries can start pivoting and reshaping our sort of TDM program within the libraries. I want to share a couple of screen grabs. I have 3 here of the researchers' work from her TDM Studio workbench. So here's a graph that depicts the newspaper article distribution from her data range, 1960 to 2019, of 5 identified groups in her research. And what you're seeing here is the frequency of time each term appears in the newspapers in her corpus. And I probably should have mentioned that her corpus, the date range is 1960 to 2019. She's looking at local, state, and national papers in all 50 states. She has a lot of data here. And so this is a screen grab of these 5 terms: Arab, Muslim, Middle Eastern, well, more than 5 groups, I guess, Asian, African American, and Latino. She also uses Latinx, just depending on the time period. So this is a very clear distribution there. Here's another another newspaper article distribution, but this time it depicts the co-occurrences of the 5 identified groups in her research. And, you know, so it's answering, where do we see Arab and Middle Eastern, these 2 terms listed together in a newspaper article, for instance. And so on the top right, you can see the legend where it includes, so Arab and Middle Eastern, ARME is the abbreviation. So she can start determining the peaks and valleys of those co-occurrences of terms across the corpus of her choosing. And then finally, here's a bar graph that depicts the total sum of all of those co-occurrences of the 5 identified groups in her research. And again, the co-occurrence of Arab and Muslim is ARMU, which is that bar on the far left-hand side. The co-occurrence of ARME is Arab and Middle Eastern. So she's able to see kind of another view, another vantage point of the co-occurrences of these terms, which is helping to answer those 4 research questions that I posed earlier. The researcher is working now with a graduate student remotely, of course, to finish the data collection and the analysis portion of her research. She's really happy with what she's been able to accomplish in such a short period of time. Again, right, to do this manually, it would have taken her months and months, and really looks forward to the next phases. I just had a call with her yesterday, and she's really excited. And I do too. I'm really excited to see what she can accomplish and what we can be doing with TDM Studio after working with her. So at this point, I'd like to turn over the presentation to my colleague, John Cocklin from Dartmouth Library, who will be presenting sort of another and different case study about TDM on his campus. John?
Thank you, Caroline. And so my discussion will follow up nicely on her discussion because just exactly like USC, Dartmouth College has many people on campus that are doing textual analysis with or without the library. And on this first slide there over on the right-hand side, it can be simple. So for example, that 2020 is just a word cloud from a senior survey that was done last year to obviously much, much more complex. And the library has been in discussions because people obviously want access to the content and would love to do textual mining. But it's been hit or miss because oftentimes what they would like to analyze is in copyright or it's something that for whatever reason the company or the publisher is not interested in providing to academics to research. But like I said, people are web scraping and doing many other things to go ahead with textual mining. So the first thing about the ProQuest TDM that was attractive to us was content. The ProQuest TDM, one of the benefits that ProQuest is doing here is negotiating with the individual publishers. So first off, that was that researchers that we were talking with wanted access to like the most recent issues of the New York Times and various things. And as I said, I haven't had as much success as we might like, either us or the researchers in getting access to those. So first off, it was the content. We do know of researchers that have specific research that could use ProQuest TDM. And in fact, a driver of this whole process for us was one specific research, one faculty member that we know can use it. But we have the luxury of time. So it wasn't like we had one researcher that said, okay, I need to start this and I need to start it now. We've had the luxury of time. So the way we've addressed it is a little bit different because what we've done is we are taking a look at what do we need to do to set up the support that would be necessary to provide ProQuest TDM to a wide range of researchers. And it's a little bit different because, like I say, this isn't around one researcher. This is trying to think in advance of some of the things that we might need. And it also gave us the chance to learn more about the product. And also, like Caroline was saying, we have varying degrees of knowledge around the library about the types of things that are required for textual analysis. But we haven't been as directly involved with textual analysis projects. So we were kind of looking at this as a way to kind of take a look at textual analysis and to see what it would require from the library. So a little bit different in the sense that I'll be talking more about this process of trying to set up some things that we can put in place to help support us as we roll this out to researchers. So as I say there in the second part of the slide, it's an opportunity not only to address the student and faculty research need, but also to grow and develop textual analysis and data mining skills of us ourselves, the librarians. And also, I should say, we work very closely with our partners in ITC. That's what we call computing at the Dartmouth. And of course, they've been involved with textual analysis as well. And they're very excited about working with us on this. Also, one thing that's really nice about TDM Studio, we're not really doing a demonstration of it, but it provides a structured and relatively affordable way for our library to achieve this goal. When we've approached publishers about getting access to them, it's been prohibitively expensive in some cases. The other thing is, of course, it's raw data that has no structure to it, and even beginning to web scrape the data would take technical skills. The nice thing about ProQuest TDM, it has a structure in place, has some documentation already, has things that we can build on and learn on. So some challenges that are probably unique to Dartmouth, but not unique to some of you out there. Dartmouth has professional schools, medicine, a business school. It also has PhD programs in the sciences, psychology, and other things. But it doesn't have PhD programs in some of the areas that you would think would be very interested in textual data mining, specifically the humanities and social sciences. And so that presents a challenge in the sense that the faculty oftentimes use undergraduate students for research, which is one of the selling points of Dartmouth College. Undergraduate students have a great opportunity to work with faculty researchers and to work side by side with them on these projects, sometimes get published right along with the faculty member. But in terms of the actual process, when you're working through, say, a complex textual analysis project, one is that undergraduate students sometimes might have one of the skills needed for textual analysis, but not other skills. They're still learning themselves oftentimes, and so to fill in the gap, oftentimes what they'll do is they'll go right to either the library or to ITC and say, I'm not familiar with this, and can you help us with this project? The other thing is the undergraduates, their schedule can be disjointed. For one thing, Dartmouth College has 10-week, short 10-week terms rather than full semester. So there's the breaks and everything else that go with that. But then they of course take internships. They're off campus in the summers, and various other interruptions that just can occur in an undergraduate's time at college. So sometimes those gaps need to be filled by the library or ITC rather than whereas somewhere else those gaps might be filled by a graduate student there for a longer time and committed to that project. One example I'll give is just the Dartmouth Economics Research Scholars. This kind of shows Dartmouth's commitment over the past couple of years to even, I would say, what would you say, crank up student involvement. They take the cream of the crop of the economics students and they assign them to faculty members for research, and these students, it's a great opportunity for them. And so here again, we just rely on undergraduate students a great deal. And so how can we help not only the faculty members, but the undergraduate students as they are involved with these projects? So as a process of thinking through what we need to do to support the ProQuest TDM and more robust textual data mining analysis, first up, develop the skills. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But also provide documentation and scripts. And I'll say that there already is, ProQuest has the backbone structure for documentation and some of the scripts that you need to use. And we are basically building on what ProQuest has done. Not so much, I wouldn't say fine-tuning it for Dartmouth specifically, but just making it so that it's I would maybe in some ways making it even more basic so that somebody that doesn't have extensive knowledge of these things might be able to use it, but also to help people kind of quickly get started on using ProQuest TDM so that they then can get to the textual analysis. And we are developing also guidelines beforehand. And I can tell you right now, we just had a meeting last week, and we'll talk about some of the guidelines but in a little bit. But these guidelines, we're still in the process of developing them, and we fully expect that we're going to plan this all out very carefully, have very thoughtful guidelines and everything else. And as soon as researchers start using it, we're going to change those. So we expect this. We know it's going to happen. So the skills. So we are working on the idea of building a group of data citizens throughout the library. This is something that's been talked about. You see it in the literature. Data scientists are, one is data science itself is sort of ill-defined, and data science is actually a wide range of skills, both technical and non-technical. And to find one person with all those skills can be difficult. They can also be expensive. And so if you don't get the unicorn that is the data scientist, how can you still be involved with these things? And one way to do that is to build a group of data citizens that might not have the full suite of data science skills, but have the certain parts of it. But of course, as the case, as might be the case at your library, at our library, a lot of us came into the library profession without some of these skills. So we're actually using ProQuest TDM to build on, to learn these skills, build on these skills, and to kind of build on that group of data citizens. So we have a working group, and the working group is actually a part of a larger advisory group. So all the people in the working group are on the advisory group. I'm on the working group and the advisory group. But the working group was set up to basically start to actually work with ProQuest TDM to see how it worked, what documentation and things it had, what it didn't. And the skill levels vary. James Adams, he's pretty close to actually the unicorn that is a data scientist. So we're very fortunate to have him. But one thing I kept in mind was that I didn't want every time somebody wanted to use ProQuest TDM to say, where's James? Where's James? He's already pretty busy, as you might imagine. So I wanted to have a group of people that also could help with this. But James Adams, and he's been great, and so quickly took a look at the R side of ProQuest TDM and took a look and said, yep, it works well and what we needed to do. And the other thing that was nice about it, I'll be honest, I'm advanced beginner in R, but with having James, he was able to run through and do some things in ProQuest TDM that then he could show me the scripts. And so I could run through them. It would have taken me weeks to try and figure out on my own or through tutorials and things like that. So it's been very nice in the case of James that he could kind of do things quickly. And then here I am, I can now use ProQuest TDM, not as well as James, but to enough of a level where I would feel comfortable introducing it to a faculty researcher or to some researcher. The other two people that were important in the working group was Paige Scudder and Mark Mounts. Paige is a beginning Python user, and so it's been a wonderful opportunity for her to use Python in the wild. And then Mark Mounts is an advanced Python user, but new to kind of some of these. He hasn't done that much in the way of textual analysis, so a good opportunity for him to learn more of the textual analysis work with Python. The advisory group is a wide-ranging group. Like I say, we're kind of looking at this as a way to kind of introduce the library to textual analysis in a larger way. So two AULs, which never hurts. It's institutional buy-in. Ken Peterson is the one who's providing the money for this, so he's very engaged, very interested. Daniel Chamberlain, Associate Librarian for Digital Strategies. Laura Bronstein is our Digital Humanities Librarian. We expect that she and her team will be using this in future. It's interesting, Dartmouth has a very robust digital humanities program, but it hasn't done much in the way of textual analysis. So this is a good way to introduce them and get them working with it. And then Wendell Cox, Laura Lelligden, both are subject librarians. Laura is also co-lead of the research data program. And in their areas and in their interests, we expect that they will be will be interested users, and they're interested in learning. So over time, the idea is that James, Paige, Mark, I will start to introduce these other people to actually using ProQuest TDM, and then they'll go out and they'll teach other people in the library how to use ProQuest TDM, and we'll start to build this expertise. So the Dartmouth Library case study. We're developing these draft guidelines. And that's, as I said, this is changing as we speak. So the group is kind of formulating these, and I expect that they will change. Some of these are criteria required by ProQuest. Some of them are things that we thought of. So research team, what we're thinking of as an application process using Google Forms, and the research teams will apply. A research team would have a maximum of 5 members, and we're thinking at least one Dartmouth faculty member. And actually, at our last meeting, we thought also at least one Dartmouth faculty member or a postdoc or a graduate student, because we see times where it might be a graduate student that wants to use this, and we want to make that available to them. But this also alleviates the reason for this requirement was thinking this may or may not be appropriate for undergraduate term papers. So the idea of having a faculty member would make it a little bit more robust and make it so more manageable perhaps for undergraduate students. At least one person not affiliated with the library or ITC, familiar with R and or Python. We have a lot of workshops at Dartmouth and different ways to learn R or Python, both within and without the classroom. But to think that somebody would start to use the ProQuest TDM and also at the same time on their own that there would be nobody on the research team that would have an understanding of how to use these things might not be the best, might not be of success for the research group. So this is one thought we had to kind of help with that, to make sure there's one person on the team. And then, of course, have one person from the library or ITC to act as a liaison with ProQuest and introduce the team to using TDM and answering questions. They're saying, and we're thinking of calling this perhaps best practices now or something, but some things to keep in mind. A research team has a workbench for 2 months. That's one of our requirements to kind of, because we expect that there will be demand. And so the renewal can be requested and will be determined by demand. Document content cannot be downloaded and can only be used within TDM. That's something that's a limitation by the publishers, because they require that the content actually be used within the system. So any research team files will be deleted at end of the project time. So all scripts, results, the scripts and results can be downloaded, but the team needs to make sure they do that so it is available locally for them for preservation. And then this is a couple of ProQuest things. There's you can select a maximum of 10 data sets or corpuses at a time, and there's a maximum to get an idea of the size. We are talking about a huge amount of content, maximum of 2 million documents per data set or corpus. And so it's like, so these files are big, but there is a maximum. The workbench would have a maximum of 10 data sets. Now, one thing I will mention is one thing that is nice to ProQuest is just introduced to some libraries to test is a library workbench. So this whole works on the idea of a workbench. And so the idea would be that the researchers would have it for a time period. And then as you got the idea, all the files and everything, the content files would be wiped clean for the next research team. And we were saying, well, we would like to have a place to hold the scripts that we are developing. We'd also like to have a place where we could have people roll on and off the workbench to learn how to use it. Also have a workbench available so we could do demonstrations. So what ProQuest has done is they're trialing right now with us and with some other libraries a workbench for libraries, which is a great, so far has been a great thing. So briefly, just wanted to show you the selection process of the content is very elegant, I would say, and ProQuest has done a good job. It has a nice interface for selecting materials. You don't need to use Python or R to do that. So when you're actually selecting which newspapers, dissertations, whatever you subscribe to through ProQuest, there's a nice interface for that. And then you get, once you've selected your data, then you put it into the side where then you do need to use our Python. And I just wanted to show that it was just a brief example of what James Adams has started to create, kind of again building on what ProQuest already had. But to just give an idea, this is a snapshot of the Jupyter notebook that James, so everything's based on Jupyter notebooks, and this is from an R Markdown file that James Adams set up to show people, kind of walk them through the process of, okay, you've selected your data, how do you use it now in R? We also have these for Python. And I just wanted to show you the first thing there is he's saying first you load in your necessary libraries. This is our packages that you're loading in if you're familiar with R. And I should mention that ProQuest has some packages already in their system. Tidyverse or Vest, I believe they have in there. But TidyText is one that they didn't have loaded in. I'm going to recommend that they do add the TidyText package. But what James did was he set up a kernel that had the TidyText package loaded in it. So then that way you could just start up the kernel and go. So again, sort of fine tuning it, and it gives you the flexibility to do things locally so that you can set it up for local use. And then finally, this is just quick results. Again, this first script, this is the end. You saw the beginning of this R markdown. This is the end, his results. This is just Washington Post, period of time. You can tell the topic, it was COVID. And so I think we did just a search. This was just us, but it was just a search for COVID in the Washington Post articles for some months in the spring. This is a simple word count. Again, the idea here is that we're just getting people. First, let's show you how to orbit the Earth with the ProQuest TDM before we let you shoot off to the moon or wherever you're going to go. And so we'll be building on this, and the idea now is that we're going to be making these scripts available. So stay tuned, because we're going to probably put these under Creative Commons licenses, so other people using the ProQuest TDM product can use it. But I did want to at least illustrate some of what we've done. And so that's it for my presentation. I'll turn it over to Mindy now.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Caroline. So I will just move forward a little bit. It was great to hear about 2 different case studies and 2 different approaches of implementing TDM Studio within a couple of our early adopters. And I also just wanted to give a word of thanks to our product team, especially John Dillon, who has helped both of these libraries extremely get started, get familiar with the platform, and also one of our colleagues, also Frank Zhang, is working with many of our researchers in order to help with those scripts and get everything implemented into Studio and get that backbone that John mentioned started, so that our users have a much more efficient path to getting started with their research. We just launched TDM Studio in mid-April of this year, so some of these early adopter libraries started using the software a little bit before that, maybe a few months before that, but at different time frames. But this is just a quote from one of our other libraries in Australia who is using TDM Studio also, and I think that it highlights a couple different facts. One is that TDM Studio, even though when we think about text and data mining, we immediately think of the digital humanities, but really the content with ProQuest has been applicable across all types of disciplines, everything from medicine, business, sociology, journalism. We've had all types of requests from lots of different users across many different disciplines, and I think it also speaks to the popularity of different disciplines understanding the value of performing text and data mining and the adoption of some of these techniques or data science techniques into all of those different disciplines. So I think it's great to see that it does attract a lot of attention, especially as I think John and Caroline both mentioned, the capability to access current news. So today's news, the past 20 years, or even if you wanted to do the past 150 years of news, being able to access that type of content has been somewhat difficult, not impossible, but difficult in the past. And our goal is really to add some efficiencies around that workflow so that our researchers can really focus on spending the time in the analysis rather than for some portion of getting the data to analyze. So we've had lots of different partners and early adopters, and throughout the process, we've heard lots of different things about challenges in a text and data mining workflow. John mentioned the one in the middle here about uncertain content usage rights. Do our researchers have the right? Are they scraping different sites? How long will that take? Even when you're scraping those sites, are you getting content or data that's relevant to your research? And even if you request historical files or perpetually licensed content, that can be long wait times. Even from ProQuest, it may take 6 months on a normal basis, but now in COVID, it takes even longer to get some of that content. And being able within TDM Studio to have access to that content, build a 2 million document and have access to it just under a day. So once you've collected it, being able to have access to it and programmatically begin to perform the analysis is a huge benefit. And some of it has been very expensive or prohibitive, inaccessible previously by having access to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, even ProQuest dissertations and theses and scholarly journals has been a huge benefit for many of our research teams that have been using TDM Studio. So as I sort of led you to some of these is really the capability within the interface, and we're not doing a demo, but if you have interest in a demo, I'll give you a place where you can reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to walk you through it. But the capability for the researcher to target their content set directly to their research question. So they can select publication titles through to the years in which they might be interested, and even some keywords in order to make sure the data set that they're selecting is then not necessarily using processing time and effort that's not really related to their research, so that they can get the right data set up front. And being able for ProQuest really negotiating and making sure that the content that you have access to, you can move forward with confidence that the content rights are cleared for text and data mining, which is also trying to do that individually for the libraries, and if the researcher's trying to do it too, very time-consuming and cumbersome to be able to deal with many of these different providers. So I mentioned that you can create data sets in hours versus months, really trying to expedite and make the research process more productive rather than more frustrating for our researchers, so that they can fully utilize the value of the content in which the library has already provided them. Instead of going through it one document at a time, but having access to large corpora and being able to analyze those in ways that weren't necessarily possible before, has enabled many of our researchers to develop insights and career-defining discoveries with access to this content. So as I mentioned, some of that marquee content being that subscription level content, scholarly journals, newspapers, and also within the system being able to collaborate. And as we move forward, some of our plans are even being able to collaborate further between different schools or users. So really building upon that community and collaboration aspect of the solution itself. So I think some of the main highlights are really some of that sought after content and being able to easily access it and the efficiency of accessing it. John and Caroline both mentioned the need to be able to use R or Python in order to perform the analysis, to use any of the data analysis techniques. We do write some samples that you can manipulate for your particular data set. But throughout all of our conversations with our development partners, really the flexibility to be able to have control rather than a black box data analysis technique was really what our researchers were looking for. And then a lot of the efficiencies that I've already talked about in the ability to collaborate within TDM Studio. And now you can use it for research, teaching, and learning. But really, as we leverage more of the teaching and learning and begin to introduce students and expand our digital literacy so that students understand text and data mining, how to approach it, how to evaluate and analyze the content. I'll show you a quick glimpse of where we're headed and the first introduction of some of that capability that's coming in December 2020, in addition to the capability to access content and perform text and data mining using R or Python. In December, we will be introducing an interface where non-coding, whether that be students, faculty, current researchers, to get a quick glimpse of their initial data set before they perform further analysis. They'll be able to choose a data set of about 10,000, not 2 million in this case, and be able to perform. We're launching in December with geographic analysis. So they would be able to perform a geographic analysis, which would look something similar to, we're still finalizing and testing the interface. So it may not look exactly, but then they'll be able to see the patterns within their data on a geographic basis, be able to manipulate time frames, be able to zoom in and see the list of content that's listed within there. And then as we move forward to 2021, continuing to build out and adding additional data analysis techniques. We have prioritized, we'll be working with some of our faculty who are already using some of our prototypes to determine, is the next data analysis technique topic modeling, is it network analysis, what would be best for their students, but adding more data analysis techniques as we move forward into 2021. So this is really exciting for us to be able to serve those just beginning or those wanting to evaluate their content in a deeper way than they can by reading it through this type of interface all the way through to our advanced researchers as being able to have all skill levels, have access to text and data mining is a huge benefit across the university campuses, and for libraries to be able to provide a solution that can meet the needs of those different user groups. So if you're interested in finding out more, you want to see a demo, you want to look at some infographics or some case studies, this is a little bit of a long URL, but you'll get it also when we follow up with an email here. If you go to this email address or this link, it is not an email address, this link, then you'll be able to access all of that content there. You can reach out and see when we have regularly scheduled demos, or you can ask for a specific demo for your particular university. I want to again really thank John and Caroline for sharing their stories and how they've approached text and data mining. I know a lot of the libraries that we're working with are having different approaches and figuring out what's best, because while in the past they've gotten some requests, it's now figuring out, now we have a solution, how are we going to manage that demand, be able to understand the tools, and also libraries also coming up to speed on text and data mining techniques so they can help understand how to apply them across the different disciplines. With TDM Studio, it's been great that the two of you have been able to share your story, and we continue to look forward with working with both of your teams as we both grow the product and grow sort of the exposure across campus to text and data mining. So at this point, I really just want to open it up for questions. We have about 8 minutes left. Please feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A so that we can address those. And I think Mark's going to help us with those questions. I'll hand it over to you, Mark.
Right. Thank you, Mindy. And of course, thank you, Caroline, and thank you, John, for the presentations. Really excellent information there. Looking at the Q&A, as Mindy said, we've got a couple of questions in there from folks already. If you have additional questions, please feel free to drop those right in the Q&A box, and we'll take just the time that we have here to answer as many of those as possible. Looking back a little way into the queue, Caroline, we had a question here from Monica, who asked about the types of the documents that were being used. And so are these English-only publications, or are they, you know, Spanish language, and what sorts of publications were being used in the analysis?
That's a great question. Thanks, Monica. I also tried to privately chat her, so you might already have the answer, but for others who are interested, the work that the sociology researcher, the corpus that she's using are English language newspapers only. So it's just such a great question. Yeah, English language only.
Okay, great, great. And sort of spinning that question a little bit for you, Mindy, what are some of the data sets that are available within TDM Studio?
Yes, we have lots of different data that are available within TDM Studio. So if you're at your library today and you go to the ProQuest.com or what was previously search.proquest.com, and any of the content, with a few exceptions that we're still working with those publishers to gain those text data mining rights, almost all of the content that you see within that website that your university subscribes to would be available for text and data mining. So if they subscribe to some foreign language titles, then those would be available. Also, depends on from university to university what is available.
Excellent, great. So looking through some of the questions we've got here, we have one from Angela who says, due to COVID-19, many researchers are working remotely. And I'm sure that's true at both of your institutions to a greater or lesser degree. Have you seen any challenges in working with TDM Studio remotely? How has that worked?
I'll go first. Everything that you see that we did was done from home. I mean, we got it just under the wire, and so everything that you've seen and what we've worked through and everything was done from home. I think that ProQuest, I think it's going to be a challenge for ProQuest. One thing I've seen is that I think more and more users are using it, so the servers are slowing down because it's a lot of data. So I think they're going to have to, at some point ramp up the servers. But as far as working from home, no. As long as because ours free, Python you can get, so yeah, everything's worked well from home.
Excellent, and I would just throw that over to you, Caroline. Has that been your experience too?
Yep, John said it very well. Same.
Excellent, excellent. Just another question here about publication, really, and using data for publication from Laura. She says, first off, fantastic presentations. Thank you so much. Could you talk a bit about what would happen if a researcher is funded by a grant that requires that the underlying data be shared upon publication, or for journals that have those sorts of requirements? Yeah, go ahead, please.
So I can speak to that one. So that's really about reproducibility and data sets. So ultimately, you can export any of your derived work, so any of the feature sets, tables, graphs, all of that information that would need to be provided based on that grant. Also, if you're submitting for peer-reviewed journals, you can also, if that type of data is not detailed enough, we can give one-off access to whoever your peer reviewer is to be able to access your data set. We are working on our future roadmap of implementing a more formal reproducibility capability within TDM Studio. So that's a great question. So all of that different pieces there that you can export. You can export your citation data, like I said, feature sets, all of that type of thing in order to reproduce any of those visualizations or analysis that you did. And then again, if they need access to TDM Studio, we would be more than happy to help you get them access to that so that they can evaluate your research.
Excellent, excellent. Looking at the clock, we are getting down to about the last minute and a half that we have today. And I know one of you has to run, so I would just, of course, say thank you again for the presentations. We really appreciate your time in pulling all of this together, Mindy and John and Caroline. I would mention to the attendees listening in that we should get an email from ACRL in Choice within about 24 hours with a link to the recording of this. So be on the lookout for that. And if you have just a minute or two here at the end of the presentation to respond to a quick survey, you should see that in your chat box. We would really appreciate it if you would take a moment to give us some responses. We use those to try and improve the presentations, and we really value the feedback that we get at the end of these presentations. So if you have a second to do that, we would really appreciate it. And of course, thank you to all of you listening in out there. We appreciate your time today. And we hope that in the near future, we will see you again. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.